Hello friends and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to learn the basics of React.js. React is a JavaScript library that can help us to create user interfaces from components, basically websites from pieces of code. So we break our code into pieces that are called components, and then we can use those components anywhere in our application, and they are easy to maintain and also dynamic. We can of course build single page applications using React and React Router, which we will learn in this video. So let's get started by creating our application. Alright, so we need to install React using Vite, and in order to use Vite, we need to have a node installed on our machine. So to check if you have node installed, you can just type node-v, and if it gives you a version number, that means you have it installed and it's working. If it doesn't, you can install it from nodejs.org. So I have it in my machine, so I can type npm create vite at latest. So if I press enter on this command, it will give me some prompts. The first one is the project name, so I'm going to call it React Basics, and then I need to choose the framework. I'm going to choose React, of course, and then the variant of that framework. I want to use simple JavaScript. Okay, now that is done, we can change the directory and go inside that React project and install all the dependencies with npm I. So when that is done, we can type code space dot to open VS Code in that folder. So I'm going to close this terminal and open an integrated terminal in VS Code. And in here, I'm going to run npm run dev to start the local development server. This will give me a link so I can open it in a browser. This is our React application that we just installed using Vite, and we have a button here we can click. So let's put this side by side with VS Code. Let's have a quick overview of our folders and files in this application. All right, so we have 3 folders and a bunch of files. The first one is node modules that contains all the JS dependencies our project needs. Then we have our public folder that contains all the public assets, including this icon, which we see up here and also down here. Then we have our source folder, which is the brain of our application, and we will use this folder to create our application. Within the source folder, we have the assets, which would contain all the medias or icons or even CSS file. I personally like to put my CSS files inside the assets folder, so later on we will move these and clean the code. Right under assets folder, we have 2 CSS files that are just styles, and then 2 app with the extension of JSX. Now, if you're not familiar with JSX, it is just JavaScript and XML. JSX extension allows us to type JavaScript and HTML inside the same document and also have the code formatting and autocomplete. So it makes our job a lot easier, especially when we are working with React. So I will explain what's going on in these files. After the source folder, we have some config files and our index.html, which is the root of our application. And then we have our package.json that contains the script, the dependencies of our project, and also some information about our project. Then we have our Vite config. So we're not going to touch any of this except index.html, that we're just going to have a look at it, and of course the source folder. So let's see how React works under the hood, and it starts in this HTML document. We have a div with the ID of root, and then our script that is pointing to main.jsx in source folder. So let's go there and see what we have. We have few imports and one statement from React. So let's break this down and make this easy. Basically, first we need to grab our root element from the DOM, and here we are doing that. I'm going to cut this here and add it here and then pass root down here. Just makes things cleaner, I would say. So we are calling the create root method from React DOM, which we are importing it up here. The create root method asks for a root HTML. So basically an HTML wrapper, which is our div down here. Then after that, we are saying we want to render something in that root using the render function. And in this case, we say we want to render our app component, which is what we see on the screen. So don't worry about these components at this point. I will explain them in a second. So again, we are saying we want to render our app component inside this root. So if we go back to index.html, basically this is what's happening behind the scenes. We are injecting that app component here. So of course, HTML doesn't know what is app, and that's being injected with React.js or JavaScript. Back to main.jsx, inside the render function, you can see we have these green tags, and this app is coming from our app.jsx, which is our component, and we will go through it in a moment. We also have this React strict mode. This is a built-in component from React which we are importing it up here. And it is mainly used for development, and it can help us to identify and fix errors. And because this is a small project and we don't need this, I'm going to delete it. It is not going to change anything for this small project, but it is recommended to keep it there if you are working on a bigger project and if you are deploying your project for production. So I'm going to delete it because it keeps things simpler here. Now we have nothing except this React DOM, which we are using it to create our root, which is our HTML div, and then render a component inside of it. And of course, we are importing our style file down here. Now let's go to that app and see what we have there. So this is a component, it's a typical React component, and later on we create our own components and work with them. So you can see we have imports up here and then a function, and later on we export that function so we can use it somewhere else, like in our main JavaScript file. So up here we have a useState from React, which I will explain what it is when we get to it. And then we have two logos we see on the screen. Then we have our style document again. And then we have our function, which is called app. And we have the functionality before the return statement. So any JavaScript expression we want to write, we can write it up here. And then in the return statement, we are returning markup. So you can see we have a div with two icons. We have a text. So if we change this text to something else, we can see it is changing on the screen. We have our div with the class of card, and a button. When we click on it, it increases. So we will create all of this for our own so we can learn how it works. So a few notes before we move on. You notice here we have class name instead of saying class, that is card, right? Because we are still in JavaScript file, even though it is markup here, we are still in JavaScript, and class is a reserved word in JavaScript. So we need to use class name here. There are other examples of this. For example, if we use a label, we cannot say label for something. We need to use HTML for. And most code editors will help us with these names, so we don't have to worry about it. Another thing you notice is this empty anonymous tag, and this is used because we cannot have two root elements or multiple root elements inside our return statement. So if I delete this one, you can see this is giving me an error because these are now siblings and there is no parent. There should be only one parent, and to avoid conflict when we render everything into the DOM and components go next to each other, we use an empty tag. So when this is rendered on the page, this element doesn't mean anything. So if we inspect the page and let's bring it up, so you can see we have our div with the ID of root, and then inside of that we have another div, which is this div. So this is nothing. And one quick note again about CSS, we can have as many CSS files as we want, and when it is rendered, they all go in a style tag in the head element of our HTML. So you can see we have two style tags here, one from app.css and one from index.css. So of course, whatever classes we use in these files will be available to all the elements down here. So if you have, for example, a class of logo in this file and a class of logo in this CSS file, you need to be careful which one has precedence and maybe change the names. So before we get any further, let's clean up this project. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to delete everything in this index.css because I need to keep the file. I want to bring in Tailwind. And then in the app.js, I'm going to delete all these imports and this const, and inside the return, I'm going to delete everything. Just add an h1 and just type home. So I'm going to keep it like that. And we can also delete this app CSS because we're not going to use it anymore. And inside the assets folder, I'm going to delete this logo. I will leave the logo for Wheat up there, just it's a nice logo. What I want to do now, bring in Tailwind so we can start learning React. So down here, I'm going to split this terminal by clicking on that split terminal thing. And let's go to Tailwind website and into the installation framework guides Wheat. We have using React up here. So I'm going to copy these two commands and bring them to the project and paste them here. So this will install Tailwind in a moment. And next we need to copy these file directories and paste them inside the Tailwind config file inside the content array. Then we need to bring in a Tailwind directives. So I'm going to copy this, and inside our index CSS, I'm going to paste them and save. And I think we're done. Let's go to our app. And on this H1, I'm just going to add some Tailwind classes. For example, text for Excel and font bold. So let's see how it looks. So it doesn't work sometimes. So all we have to do, just break the development server by pressing Ctrl+C 2 times and run it again. And there we go. Now it's working. All right, let's start learning React. The first thing I want to do, I want to go to index.html, and on the body, I'm going to add some classes. So I'm going to add bg gray 100 to have some background, some mild background, and on the div with the ID of root, I will have some margin of 4, padding of 4, some shadow and rounded corners, and that's what we get on the screen. So I want to have this kind of a card on top of the background. Let's close all these files that we don't need and stay on app.jsx. So the first thing, we want to see how we can use dynamic data in our markup. Right now we have this text home, which is hard-coded, but I want to have a variable like here, and that, for example, it's a greet variable, and it's going to say hello user. For example, if the user is logged in, we are going to see this. So how can we show this greet text inside our markup? We can use curly brackets and then pass in the name of that variable. There we go. So that is how we can show dynamic data in the DOM. So next we want to see how we can do an attribute binding. Like this class name is an attribute, right? And we want to pass this value as a dynamic data. So let's create another constant or another variable up here, and I'm going to call it my class. So what I want to do, cut these classes out of here and paste them up here. So right now the classes are gone, but what I want to do, use this dynamic data for the styles of this h1. So just like what we did here using the curly brackets, we can do the same with attributes. All we have to do after the equal sign, pass those curly brackets and then the name of that variable. Now keep in mind, we don't need the quotations here. So if we pass the quotations, this will be again a text. So we don't need it. We just need the curly brackets. And you can see when it's saved, we get our styles back. So we can write any JavaScript expression in this curly bracket, and it can be used anywhere in the markup. So for example, if I want to show this greet message conditionally, I can pass a ternary operator. Let's say I have a variable that says logged in and it is false by default. So I want to check if this logged in, the user is logged in, then show the greet that says hello user. But if the user is not logged in, I want to say please log in. And you can see because it is false at this time, we see this text. So this is false, therefore we are showing this text. If we change this to true, of course we will see the hello user text. So you can type any JavaScript expression inside these curly brackets. So we can use this attribute binding on any HTML attributes. So for example, if we have a button and we want to disable this button conditionally based on the user logged in, so we can just pass disabled attribute, and just like what we did up here with the class, we can pass the variable here. So logged in is a true or false variable, right? And if it is true, this button will be disabled. It's kind of going opposite right here. So we can negate it. For example, if it is not logged in, disable the button, and we don't see anything because Tailwind classes remove all the default disabled styles. I can just add something. For example, if it is disabled, bg gray 300. So right now we are saying if the user is not logged in, the button should be disabled. That means it should have background of gray. Right now it's true. That means the user is logged in and therefore it is enabled. But if I change this to false again, there we go, it's disabled now. So I cannot click on it. And that's about attribute binding. So the next step, we want to see how we can render lists in the DOM. So let's create a div down here and let's have an h1 that says item, for example. And let's just give it a text to Excel to all the text inside of this wrapper. So let's say I have an array of numbers and I want to pass multiple numbers here. So if we pass that nums down here using that curly brackets like this, we will get all these values inside the array as a text next to each other. There is not even a space. And this could be any value inside this array. So, but this is not what we want. Of course, we want to render an h3 for each element inside this array. And in order to render lists in React, we need to map over an array and render an element for each item in that array. So above the h3, we're going to use curly brackets and say map over the nums, and for each element inside nums array, we want to render something. So I want to use the parentheses here and press enter and move this h3 here. I don't want to render nums anymore. I want to render element. You also notice this red line under the h3. I will explain it in a second. Let's save this one. Of course, we see what we want, but in the console we also have a warning that says each child in a list should have a unique key prop. In React, when we are using a loop, we need to provide a key for each item in that loop, so we would not get any errors or warnings. And we can do so in React by providing the key attribute or prop and then pass something unique to this. Now this has to be unique. So if I pass the element, I have two items that are similar. So if I save this one, I get another error. It says encountered two children with the same key. Now, if I change one of these, for example, to another number and refresh, you can see all the errors or warnings are gone and this is working fine. So of course, this is just an example, but when we are working with a real application, and we will build our blog log application in this video, we will have IDs for our posts, so we can use that one and that would be unique. And that is how we can render lists in React.js. So next we want to recreate the button that we had in the boilerplate application. So when we click on it, we will increase a number somewhere on the DOM. So let's clean up the code. I'm going to delete this div, but I will keep the h1 and the button. For the text of the h1, I'm going to change this expression and just say number is a count variable, which I don't have it at this point, but I will create it up here. So let's create it with let at first. Count is 0. We will get number is 0. And then we have our button. I'm going to delete this disabled attribute. And for the class, I'm just going to add some CSS classes. All right, so this is the button now. I just added some background and a text white, some padding, and I also added some margin bottom up here for our h1. Now remember, our h1 classes are coming from this variable up here. Let's delete this array up here too. Also the greet and this logged in variables. So first we want to see how we can apply click events. So just like simple HTML and JavaScript, we can use the onClick attribute on the button to pass some function for this button. And by convention in React, the functions start with the word handle, and the next word is whatever event or action we are performing. In this case, we are just performing a click event. So I can say handle click. If this was a delete, I could say handle delete or handle add or things like that. Of course, it's just a convention, so you can name it whatever you want. I'm going to create that handle click up here, and it is going to be an arrow function. All I want to do here is just console.log OK. So let's see if this works. Give it a save and click. Down here, of course, we get OK. So what I want to do, I want to increase this count number. So let's say count plus plus. Also, instead of logging OK, we are going to log that count. So give it a refresh and click. Well, we can see it's working because the number is increasing, but we don't see any effect on the DOM or on the screen. That's because this count is not reactive. It is just a normal JavaScript variable. A reactive data in React is just basically an alive data. It is constantly looking for changes and updates itself. So in order to have reactive data, we need to use a special function or a hook in React.js. And we saw that in the boilerplate. The function was called useState. We can bring that useState here and use it to make reactive data. Now, this is called a hook, and all the hooks in React start with the word use. We also have other hooks like useContext or useEffect, but the simplest one is the useState. Now, this useState takes the initial value of our variable that we want to use. In this case, we want to use 0. And we want to increment that number. This also returns two values inside an array. And in fact, let's just console.log this useState, see what we get. So if we go console.log and save it, down here you can see we have an array with two items. One is undefined because there is nothing in there, and the next one is a function that is in charge of mutating the first value. So it returns an array with two values, and we can destructure that and use it for our project and give it whatever name we want to. So we can create a variable here with const and use the array for destructuring. And the first item is the value we want to use. So in this case, it's our count. So we want to use this count in our application and also in our function. The second one is the function that is going to change that count. And by convention again, it starts with the word set. So set count. So if this was name, this would be set name. If this was delete, this would be set delete, and so on. So we want to set this to useState from React, which we are importing up here. And as the initial value, I'm going to pass 0. So now count is 0, and we need to delete this one because we don't need this one anymore. Now we have an error down here because we are mutating this count value directly by passing it like this. We need to use the set count. We cannot use direct mutation. So we need to say set count, and this is a function as we saw down here, and it takes the new value for this count. So we want to increment it. So we want to pass count plus 1. So count plus plus would not work in here. We need to say count plus 1, and then we are console logging that count. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to save it, refresh the page, and click. And you can see it's working. Now in the console, we start from 0 because this console.log happens before the count is added. Now sometimes you want to pass some functions in line because this is a JavaScript expression and we can do that. In times where we have just one simple action that we want to perform, we can pass this in line. So let's cut this and delete this function and add it down here. But this is wrong because we are invoking the function right here without even clicking. So if I refresh the page, I will get an error. So it will break our application. What we need to do here, we need to use an anonymous function if we want to use inline functions. We want to pass the parentheses and the arrow function, and this would work. So if you refresh, everything works the same way. So again, if you are using a function in line that you need to pass arguments to it, that means invoking it, make sure you are using an anonymous function to avoid getting an error. So that's how we get reactive data in React using the useState hook. So another useful common hook in React is called useEffect. So this useEffect hook is also from React, and you can see it is auto imported and it runs on every state change. This is a good function to use to fetch data in the initial load of our application, but we also have to be careful how we use this because, like I said, it runs on every state change. So let's see how it works. This useEffect accepts a callback function, and whatever we pass into this one is going to run every time the state changes. So let's console.log, for example, effect ran. I'm going to save this one, and you can see it ran one time because the state changed. It was a full reload. If I click on this one, you can see I'm changing the state, right? This is a reactive data, and we are changing the state of our application. This number is our state, and by clicking on it, it changes. So every time I click, you can see this useEffect is running. So you have to be very careful. If you pass a function down here that changes the state, it will break your application. You are basically in an infinite loop. So if I use the set count down here, which will change the state of our application, this would cause an infinite loop because it will change the state and it will go back up and it says, okay, there is a useEffect here. That means I need to react to some state changes. And it goes down here and there is another state change and it goes back up and down infinitely until our project is broken. So be careful how you use this useEffect, and you're changing the state inside the useEffect. But even if you have to change the state here, the good thing about useEffect is that it accepts an array of dependencies as a second argument. So the first argument of useEffect is a callback function, and the second one is an array of dependencies. And basically these dependencies means it will react or it would run only when the state of that dependency changes. For example, if I pass count down here, I want to say only change if this count is changing. So I'm going to delete this one and I'm going to create another useState. Maybe call it num and change this one to set num. So what I want to do, I just duplicate this button down here, and instead of count, I will say num. We need to change this one, of course, to set num. Change this text to add num. So let's clean the console again and give it a refresh. You can see I have two buttons, right? The effect ran one time because I said only run when the state of count changes. If I click on this add num button, you can see it's not running. I should have maybe duplicated this h1 too. So let's use num here so we see it's working. and I'm gonna just add a break line here. All right, so let's just start over. Sorry about that. So let's refresh, and you can see effect ran one time because that was the initial load. Now, if I click on the add num, so this state, which is not a dependency, you can see the number is increasing, but the effect is not running. However, if I click on this one, which is for our count, you can see the effect is running because I passed it as a dependency, meaning I want to run this function or whatever is in this callback function only if the state of this dependency changes. That's one way to avoid infinite loops. The other way would be to just pass an empty array. If we pass an empty array, this useEffect only runs one time on the page load, only once. So if I save this one and refresh, you can see we have one effect ran. But if I click on any of these, it doesn't run again. So that's why I said this is a good place if you want to fetch data, for example, for your application, which we will use. We will use the useEffect hook and then pass this empty array. So we are sure it's just going to run one time on the page load. And if the state changes, it's not going to happen again. So that is useEffect hook. Alrighty, let's see how we can create our own custom component. So what I'm going to do in the source folder, I'm going to create a folder called components. And inside that folder, I'm going to create a new file. Let's call it addnum.jsx. So I just want to have one of these as a component because you can see right now I'm repeating it twice. As we saw in our app component, we need to have a function. So we can have an arrow function or just a normal function. I'm going to use an arrow function, and the name of the function is the same as the name of the file. So addNum is going to be an arrow function, and we need to return our markup here. So I can use that empty tag, then I can pass whatever I want into here. And of course, we need to export this one at the bottom, export default addNum, so we can use it outside. So let's just add something here. I'm just going to say h1 addNum, and we want to use this in our app. The first step, of course, is to import it. So outside the function, we are going to import addNum from components folder. And inside our markup, I'm going to add it just above all of this content. And we can do so just like any HTML tag. We can just say addNum and either self-close it like this, or if we have anything that goes inside of that addNum component, we can close it like this. So this would work the same way. And we will see how we can pass children to this addNum component. So first, I'm going to put this back as a self-closing tag, and I'm going to grab one of these H1s and the buttons. So I'm going to grab this one, cut it, and delete all of this, and paste it here. So we want to just practice how to communicate between components and send and receive data. So what we have here is our class name, which is a dynamic data. We have our number is, let's change this to count. Our number is a count, so we need a count data. We also need a set count. So the good thing about component is that we can have a very clean, organized code. So whatever logic or markup belongs to a component, we will have them all in one file. So this count belongs here. So we want to add it here. Of course, we need to import useState. We can just do this. So there we go. It's auto imported for us, but we need the my class attribute. Of course, we could just bring this one there too, but I want to just kind of show you how we can communicate with the parent and grab the my class variable from the parent. Before we do that, let's clean up our app. So we don't need any of these hooks anymore. So I'm going to delete all of this, delete these imports, and I'm just going to keep one component on the page, and that is our addNum. So in order to communicate from a parent to the child, we can use props. And we saw one example of a prop, and that was the key prop on a list rendering element. So what I want to do, I want to pass this my class down to the child. So I can choose a prop name. This is my prop name. I can call it whatever I want. For example, I want to call it my style instead of my class. And what I want to pass down to the child is this my class variable. Now this addNum component, which is our child component, has a prop called my style. Now every child component in React has access to a special property called props, and we can accept it as a parameter in our function. So the first parameter that we can accept is props. And if I console.log that props, we will see we have an object. So right now this is giving me an error because this my class doesn't exist. So for now, I'm just gonna cut it for a second and save it. And you can see we have an empty object because we haven't saved our app component yet. to pass this one down. When we accept props as a parameter in our child component, we have access to an object. So let's save this app, and there we go. Now we have an object with a key value pair items. So we have our prop name as the key and our value, which is this text up here that is coming from a dynamic data, as the value of that key. So we have access to this myStyle. So if we go back to the child component and console.log props.myStyle. So if I save this one, we get the classes, and I can use it on my H1. Since this is an object and we know it's an object, we can destructure it. Instead of just passing the whole prop object, we can destructure it and pass the curly brackets in this parentheses and just grab whatever property we want to. In this case, I want to grab my style. Now I have access to this my style, so if I log it down here, I will get the same thing, those CSS classes. On my H1, I want to say class name is going to be my style. If I save it, this H1 should change. It works. And that's how we communicate from the parent to the child. Now, one quick note here. We have this wiggly red line that says our property is missing a prop validation. This is from ESLint, and it just wants to warn us that because we have no type validation, it doesn't say what is this my style, we could get errors. So be careful of that. One way to disable this, we can just go to the quick fix here and add this comment on top of our document, and this will take away that red wiggly line. All right, let's see now how we can communicate from the child to the parent. So what I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to cut this out and bring it back in here inside the parent component, and I'm going to import the useState first. And down here, what I want to do, I want to invoke a function and call this setCount inside that function, so I will increment the number here. However, the markup is still in the child component. So let's create a function here first. So I'm going to call it handle add. This is going to be an arrow function, and I'm going to call the set count here, and just like before, count plus 1. Now down here, I want to create another prop, call it handle add, and pass that handle add function down here. So that means I have access to this handle add function from my child component. We are already grabbing my style. I can also grab handle add. Now we know this is a function, so instead of all of this here, I'm going to call that function when I click on this button. We also need the count, so we can pass another prop, say count is count, which is coming from here. So again, our state is on our parent component. However, the markup is in the child component. So let's grab the count in our props object too and delete this useState import. We don't need it anymore. And reformat, save, also save the app component and give it a refresh. And when we click on it, you can see it still works the same way, even though the state is on the parent, but the click event is happening on the child. What's happening here? We are communicating from the child to the parent. We are sending a click event to the parent and incrementing this count. We will see a better example of this when we build our application and how we can actually send data alongside these event listeners to the parent. To recap, we have myStyle and count as a prop that are coming from the parent. We also have handle add function that fires up an event that goes to the parent, and the parent listens for that event. We are listening for that handle event and invoking our own event, which happens to have the same name. We can again change the name to whatever we want. And in here, we are invoking this other function. That's how we can communicate between components. So one last thing about components is to add slots. So let's say I want to have a placeholder here, and whatever content I add to this child component, whatever markup, I want it to go down here. So I need a special placeholder down here. So back to the parent component, if I close the tag like this, and inside the add num component, I want to add, for example, another h1 that says child element, and I'm going to give it some classes. So bg red 300 and padding 4. So we know clearly this is our child component. If I save this one, we see nothing, because again, even though we are passing this inside our add num and it is on the screen, we don't see anything. And if we inspect the elements, we can see we have our h1 and button, but there's nothing else. So we need to tell our child component that I need a placeholder here. In React, we have a special property on our props. So we need to accept the props up here. That means I need to do this and add the props before all of these variables, because now I'm accepting the whole props object. And down here, I can say props.children. Now this children is a special keyword in React. That means I want to add children in this slot. So whatever I pass inside this component will be placed here. So if we save it, we see our child element down here. So this could be anything we want. And that's how we can have a slot inside any component. Okay, now we are going to start building our application, and we will start by creating some files and a markup, and we will take it from there. So what I want to do here, I want to delete this component. I don't need it. Inside the app, I'm going to delete this and all of this logic and all of these imports, and I'm just going to add an h1 that says app. This is going to be our root component, and then I'm going to create some folders inside the source folder. I'm going to create a pages folder and another folder called layouts, and then inside the pages folder I'm going to create two files. One is going to be home.jsx and the other one is going to be postcreate.jsx. Inside the layout folders I'm going to create a file called layout.jsx. Alright, so let's start with home, and we are going to create our function const home equals to an arrow function, and we're just going to return an empty tag that has an h1 in it that says home, and then we are going to export that home component. So let's save this one and copy this whole thing, because we will have the similar thing in post create, and just say post create, and of course we need to change the name here. For the layout I'm going to do the same and change the post create to layout and change this one to layout. The reason I'm doing this because we are going to use a view router, and this is a convention for structuring our application when we use view router. So inside the app I'm going to save this one so we have nothing and the errors should go away. Okay, let me bring some markup into these components, and we will start with layout. So this is our layout. We have a header and a nav element, and inside of that I have an h1 that says my blog. That's kind of a logo thing, and we have two a elements or anchor tags, that one goes to the // which is our home, and then /create for creating a new post. And down here I have our main tag that would contain a slot here, so all the content of the pages should go inside here. Right now we don't have any logic, it's just a markup. So let's save this one. Let's bring in post create markup too, and of course these files will be available in a GitHub repo. So for the post create component I have an h1 that says create a new post, and then a form with one input field and one text area and a button. We will see this on the screen as soon as we install React Router, so we can navigate between these routes. So let's save this one and close them. And for the home, I'm going to leave it as it is and close home and layout. So we are back to our app component. So inside our app, I'm going to import the layout. So let's import layout, and down here I'm going to replace this h1 with the layout component that we just imported. So if I save this one, we get our navigation up here. So the reason I wanted to bring this one in before installing React Router is to show you, traditionally when we click on these links, you can see we are performing a full reload between pages, and if this was a real application we would call the server every time. So this is a traditional page switch on a website. Now with React Router we can do this on a client side, so we don't call the server every time, and it's faster and more efficient. So we need to install React Router. Let's go to React Router in W3 School. The reason I'm going here because the React Router documentation is very confusing and frustrating to work with for me, and it doesn't even have a search field. So we're going to use this W3 School, which is much cleaner, and it can help us better than the documentation. So we need to install the latest version of the React Router DOM. So I'm going to copy that command, and back into the project I'm going to paste it. All right, now that is installed. Back to the W3 School website, you can see it gives us a folder structure which we already followed. So we have a layout, we have our pages, and what we need to do in the basic usage of the React Router, we need to import some components from a React Router DOM, and then we need to use this browser router component that wraps everything, all the routes. And then we have our routes parent component, and then within that routes component, as plural, we have singular routes, and these routes even can be nested. So we can use the layout and nest everything underneath. So let's see how this works in our project. So we are inside our app component, and I'm going to import the components we need from React router. So let's say import browser router and routes and route as singular from React router. Down here, let's delete this one, and in fact delete this empty tag too. We don't need it anymore. We are going to use browser router first. So we will wrap everything inside. So basically what it does, it will take over the traditional page switch and perform the view switch or page switch on the client side. Now we need to use the routes component, and inside this routes component, we need to have our routes as singular routes. The route component, a singular route component, takes two attributes. One is path, or two props, if you will, and this path would be our base URL. So / is just the home page or the base URL. And for the element that we need to render, when we go to this one, we are going to render layout first. So we need to pass our layout as an HTML tag, a self-closing tag, and it looks like this. So this is going to be our parent route, and every other route will be nested underneath this one. I can create another route inside of this layout route. I can actually self-close this one because it's not going to have any children. This route should go to the home page. Now, our home page has the same route as this layout, so we can call it index. This is a special prop, and if we call a route index, that means it is our home page or our index page. So what element we want to render when we go to this route, which is our index page, we want to render our home page. So we need to import this up here. So import home from pages home component. This is going to be our index page. We need another route for our post create. This one has a different path, so it's not the base URL anymore, and we want to go to / create. Now we don't need to add the / here because this is nested and this is our base URL. So when we go to the create page, it's going to be a / create automatically. So what element do we want to render? When we go to this page, we want to render post create component, and again we need to import it. So I'm just going to duplicate that one and change the name to post create. If we save this one and go to these pages, you can see we are still performing a traditional switch. Now we have our routes, but the links are not quite right yet. So we need to address these links because inside our layout, we are still using a traditional anchor tag. Now, React Router provides a special link that can take over and perform a client-side page switch. So we need to import link from React Router. So let's say import link from React Router DOM and change these A elements to a link element. All right. Now the link element doesn't know what is href. It has a special property called to. So instead of href, we need to pass to. So where do we want to go when we click on home? We want to go to the home base, home URL or base URL, which is a /. When we go to a / .create, we want to go to the new post. Now here we need to provide that /. So because this is just a link. So let's save it and refresh. Watch up here as I switch between the pages, the URL is changing, but there is no full reload. That's because React Router has already taken control and it's switching the views on the client side. But there's still one problem. We don't see anything down here. We need that special slot to be able to render these views or these routes that we have nested inside our layout. We already learned that we could use props children and render something here. But since we are using React Router, there is another special component in React Router, and that is an outlet. So an outlet component is basically the same as props.children, and we can place it wherever inside the parent component that we want to render the children. So I want to have all the children or whatever I pass to this layout component to render inside this main tag. So if I save this one, we get our create post form because we are on the create page. If we go to home, we get home. And that is basically how React works. To recap, we are importing components, 3 different components from React Router. The browser router, which is the parent component, it takes control of the navigation. And then we have our routes parent, which will wrap all the routes, singular or individual routes within itself. and we can have nested routes. So we used a layout route or a layout markup to wrap every other view, and we switch between these two routes using the link component inside our layout component. Now, each of these routes render a different view or a different page, and we are able to pass that page or view within our layout as a child using this special component called outlet from React Router again. All right, now we want to populate our home page with some posts. So I'm going to close app. We don't need it anymore. I'm going to close the layout. We are done with that one. And let's open the home page. And I'm going to create a variable here called posts and paste some data here. All right, so we have an array with two objects. Each object is a post with the title, body, created at, it should be created, I'm sorry, created at, the date, and the ID. This is an array of object, and I want to show a card for each post on my homepage. So I'm going to bring some markup for these posts. So this is what we have for the markup for each post. We just have a container, and within the container we have our title and the date, which we should add dynamically, and then a button which is in charge of deleting the post. Right now it doesn't do anything, and then the body of the post. So we need to render one of these divs for each item in the posts array. And we already know how to do this. We need to map over that array. So I'm going to create a curly brackets here and say posts.map. And for each post inside of that posts array, I'm sorry, this should be P. I didn't see that. I'm going to render this whole div. So I'm going to cut it and paste it inside. And you can see it immediately complains about not providing the key. So let's do that first. On the div wrapper, I'm going to provide the key prop and pass post.id as the key because that is going to be unique. For the title, we can use the curly brackets and say grab the post title. For the date, we can do the same thing, post.created at, and for the body, post.body. Simple, right? So if we save it, we get our posts on the page. So it doesn't matter how many posts we have, we are going to get one container for each post. But this is a good place to create a component for these posts because we might use it somewhere else. We might have some filters or have a sidebar or things like that, and we want to use this posts component somewhere else. So inside the components folder, I'm going to create a file called it post item and create that function post item. It's going to be an arrow function, and let's just export it first. So we want to return all of this. So I'm going to grab the whole thing, and in here I'm going to say return that markup. Let's reformat it. Right now it complains we don't have access to these posts, so we can accept that as a prop. So we already know how to communicate. So we want to just say posts is going to be these posts. On our home page, we need to import that one first. So let's say post item. Now this time it's auto importing it, and we need to pass posts as a prop like that. Save this one and save this one, and I'm getting an error because I forgot to provide that empty tag. I'm sorry. So I'm going to do this and paste that code, and now it's gone. So I forgot to provide this empty tag, and that's why I was getting an error. And again, you can see this is complaining about the missing prop validation. So we can again bring that ESLint comment up here, so it would take away those annoying errors. So this is working just the way we want to, and we can close this one, and now our home component is much cleaner. The next step, we want to work on the delete functionality. So this is another example of communicating from the parent to the child, which is our post item, right? The next step is to communicate from the child to the parent because we want to be able to delete them, and the button is on the child component, but the state or the list is on the parent component. So we need to pass a function here, and I want to call it handle delete, and I want to pass my own function here. So I want to say handle delete. So whenever we click on this button, that will emit an event or send an event to the parent, which is going to be handle delete, and this handle delete up here is going to do something. For now, let's just say console.log. Okay, so we have access to this handle delete now. Let's go to the child component and accept it as a prop. And down here on the button, I want to say on click handle delete. Okay, let's see if this works. We should get OK in the console. So if we click on this one, we get OK, and that one, same thing. So we want to delete an item here. That means we need to grab the ID of the post and send it back to the parent. This is an example of sending data back to the parent. And we have access to the post ID within this map. All we have to do is to send something within the parentheses as a parameter. I'm going to say post.id. Now we know this is not going to work because right now I'm invoking the function. I want to send it up, so I need to use an anonymous function using the arrow function and send this post ID. Let's save this one back to the home component, which is the parent of this post item. We know we are accepting an ID. Let's see if that ID is what we want. So we have two posts, the games and books. The first one has the ID of 1 and this one has the ID of 2. Let's see if we get the right ID. So give it a refresh. This should give us 1. There we go. This should give us 2. You can see how easy we just sent some data back to the parent and we grabbed it up here. Now all we have to do, we have to filter this posts array and remove the post with the same ID as the ID we are getting from the child component. So we could say posts.filter, and for every post I want to return an array where the post.id is not the same as ID. So we've done this in previous projects multiple times, so it's quite easy. Now, if I do this, and actually let's console.log the posts array. Let's duplicate this and move it above the filter, so before and after the operation. Sorry, I forgot to actually say posts equal to the new filtered post, and we need to change this to let, of course. Sorry about that again. So let's give it a refresh. Again, we're going to delete this one. So at first we have array of 2 with 2 items, and now we have only 1. But you can see the DOM is not being updated again because this is not reactive. We already know how to do this. So let's create a const and use the array syntax. We want to grab the posts and a function that would set the posts and set it to useState. Initially, it's going to contain all these data. So I'm going to cut this array and paste it inside this useState, and I'm going to close it so we can see better. I'm going to delete this let posts. Now down here, we cannot do this anymore, again, because we need to use the set posts. So it's quite easy. We can just say set posts, and inside this post function, we can pass this. So I'm going to cut it and paste it here. I just want to return a filtered array of posts. So let's save it, give it a refresh. So we have these games and books. Delete is gone. Now you can see here again we are console.logging the same thing 2 times. This is because in this console.log, even though one is before, one is after, it's happening at the same time. It doesn't really matter what they are at this point. So if I move it outside of this function, and let's do it again. So you can see now it's working. So it's running and then it's being deleted, so we get what we want. All right, so let's delete these logs. So we know it works, but of course we are not saving the state anywhere because this is just on the front end. We need to save this in a fake database, and for that we're going to use JSON-Server. Okay, so to keep the state of our post, we are going to use JSON-Servers, and for that we need to install it. Now I already have it installed, but you can install it using npm install JSON-Server. And if you want to install it globally, you can use the flag G, or install it as a dependency, you can use the flag D. But I have it installed already. So what I'm going to do in my project, in the root directory, I'm going to create a db file, db.json. And from our home component, I'm going to grab this whole array. So I'm going to cut it and go back to the JSON. I'm going to create a posts property and paste that array and reformat it, and VS Code will turn this to a proper JSON. And I'm going to save this one, leave it open for now. And back to the home component, I'm going to pass an empty array to this useState and save it. So the posts are gone. Now in order to run a JSON server, so we will have an endpoint or a fake API URL, we can use npx JSON server and then pass the address of that file, so db.json. Or if it's in a folder, you can pass the folder name. And then we want to use the flag W for watching that file. Okay, so this gives us an endpoint to this localhost post 3000. And if we go there, you can see our posts are there as an array. So we want to grab this one or fetch this one and inject it inside our project. So remember, we used a hook called useEffect to run some logic on the page reload. So we're going to use that again, useEffect we're going to use the useEffect hook, and this takes a callback function, and we want to fetch the data from this endpoint. So our localhost / posts. Now this is going to return a promise. So I'm going to say then get the response and grab the JSON from that response. This is again another promise. So I'm going to say then grab the data and set the posts to that data. At this point, we're not going to worry about errors or the loading time, and we will do that later on. So we want to make sure this useEffect runs once when we reload the page. So we already know we can pass an empty array after this callback function as a second argument, and this will run only one time. So if I save this one, our posts are there. So now we have our posts that are coming from our fake database, and I can delete them still. It will be deleted from the DOM, but if I refresh, they will come back because I'm not making a delete request to that endpoint. Since we are here, and it's quite easy to do that, we can do this in our handle delete function. So I can make another fetch request down here to the same endpoint and then pass the ID. And we are already grabbing the ID here that is coming from the child component. With JSON-Server, if you go to an ID of a post in this case, for example, if I pass 1, you can see I'm getting that particular post. So this URL will be our localhost posts /1 or 2 or whatever. All right, this is not going to be a default get method, so we're going to pass a second argument and set the method to delete. And that's all we have to do for this. Okay, let's save this one and refresh. I'm gonna keep this open, this JSON file, and you can see down here we have our get requests. So if I delete this JS framework post, there we go, I'm getting an error because I can see here I forgot to pass that slash. So it has to be posts /ID. So I forgot to pass that one. Sorry about that. So let's save it again, refresh, go back to that db.json file and delete this post. There we go. Now we are making a delete request and it is physically gone from our database. Now I actually want it, so I'm gonna undo that and refresh this one. So, but we know our delete is working and the state is being saved inside our fake database. Next, I want to implement some loading behavior. So in a real application, the data will not come in this fast. So we would probably have to wait a few seconds before the data comes in. So to add the loading, I'm just going to create another variable and it needs to be a reactive data. So I'm going to call it loading, and the function that is going to change that, mutate that state is going to be set loading, and we want to use useState. At first, it's going to be true. So initially, it's going to be loading when we page the load, and we want to change this fetch function inside the useEffect. So when we load the page, we are fetching the data, and this loading is true, right? But after we got the data down here, we need to do something. So I'm going to use the curly brackets and reformat the code. And after we get the data, I want to use the set loading function and just set the loading to false. And right above the posts, I'm going to add a curly brackets and pass a logical operation here. So as a JavaScript logical operation, I want to say if the loading is true, then, or double ampersand, that means if this is true, whatever we pass after these two ampersand is going to run. If it's false, it's gonna ignore it completely. So we want to maybe render an h1 and say loading ... Let's do that. Now I'm going to break the JSON server down here because we can apply some delay by passing -d and some number as milliseconds. So 1 second or 1000 millisecond delay. So let's press enter. Now the JSON server is running with 1 second delay. Let's refresh this one. You can see we get loading. After 1 second, the loading is gone and we get our data. One more time. Great. So that's how we can apply loading. It's quite simple. We can do the same thing for error. So I'm going to duplicate this one and I'm going to change this to error. And this is going to be error 2, set error, and the useState is going to be null at first. So the state of error is going to be null. And if we get an error in this fetch, then we have to do something. So right after these chain of thens, I'm going to catch the error, and this takes a callback function. So what I want to do, I want to use the setError function and set our error state to the error message. So this will give us a message, and we want to just show that message on the DOM if there is an error. And we also need to set the loading to false again. So after we get the message, if there is an error, we just want to set the loading to false and also get the message. So down here, duplicate this one and say if the error is null, it means it's false. There's nothing's going to happen. But if it is not null, we are going to show that error. And again, this error is being filled with this setError function, and we are getting the message from the error that we pass into this catch function. All right, let's save it. Loading, it's working because the endpoint is correct. Let's change this to 4000. So change the port, refresh, failed to fetch. Great. So that error handling is also working. All right, so let's refresh this page. So the error is gone and we get our data. So the next step is to create a post. So let's go to new post, and we can close this home component here. We can close this post item as well and go to the post create component where our form is sitting. So now we need to create variables for the title and the post content. So we already know how to do this. We need reactive data, so we can say const, let's call it title, and the function is going to be set title, of course. This is going to be useState again, and it will auto import, and initially it's going to be an empty string. We're going to do the same thing for the body, so this is going to be body and set body. Okay, so we need to use these title and body variables for our input field and text area. We want to set the value of this input field to that title. For now, I'm just going to work with the title so we know how it works first, and then we will duplicate it for our text area. So as soon as I save this one, you can see I'm getting a warning here. It says a component is changing an uncontrolled input to be controlled. This is likely caused the value changing, yada, yada, yada. It just says if you are using this value should be title, then you need to use the unchanged method on this one. Because right now I cannot even type in here. You can see, you probably hear my keyboard, but I can't type anything here because it's being controlled by this useState, which is an empty string. So it keeps the state as this empty string. So we need to listen for the unchanged event on this input field. This is again normal JavaScript. We want to pass an arrow function here, and we want to accept the event and set the title to the event target, which is this input field, value, which is whatever we type in here. So we are basically saying this title is the same as whatever we type into it. And if we save this one and refresh, the warning goes away, and we can actually type in here. So to make sure this is working, right under that H1, I'm going to output the title so we know it's working. So you can see it's already showing up here. So if I refresh and type, you can see it's working and it's reactive. If you're coming from Vue.js like me, you know we have a V model in Vue.js, which makes this thing super easy. But in React, we don't have it. We just have to do it this way. But it works. That's the point. So we need to duplicate this one for the text area. I'm going to copy these, and right after the class name, I'm going to paste it and reformat the code so it looks better. I'm going to change this to body, and on change, set body to the target value again. All right, so this works, both of them works, and we know we are getting the data and saving them inside these two states. Now we need to do something with this data when we click on this button. So on the form, I want to perform another action. So far we learned about onClick, and this is onChange, and now we want to listen for submit. So on submit, we want to handle submit form, or just handle submit. Up here, I'm going to create that function, handle submit. It's going to be an arrow function, and let's just log title and body. So there is a problem with this code right here at this time. So let's refresh and type something, and watch what happens as I press create. You notice I made a full page reload. That was a traditional form submit. So if I click again, you can see I'm reloading the whole page because by default, forms are submitting to the same page, right? So we need to prevent the default on this form. And this is normal JavaScript, so we know we can use prevent default on that event. So we accept E or event as a parameter, and we can call the prevent default function on it. So now if I type something here and press create, we get it in the console. Great. So our form is working. All we have to do now is to send this data to our database and save it as a post. So inside this handle submit, below the prevent default, I'm going to create a variable called it new post, and this is going to be an object because all the posts inside our JSON file are objects, and we have a title, body, created at, and ID. The title and the body is the same, so I can just type title and body because they have the same name. I don't have to specify it. And then I need the created at property. This is going to be a new date, a JavaScript date, and I'm gonna chain to local data string so I can get a date just like this. And I don't need to pass the ID because JSON server creates an ID automatically. So I don't need to worry about that one. So this is all I want for my new post. And after I created my post, I need to send the post to that database using fetch post request. So I'm going to delete that console.log and I'm going to use the fetch again. The endpoint is the same, so I'm going to copy this and paste it here, but the method is different. So I'm going to pass the options as a second argument, and I'm going to pass the method as post. We need the headers that is going to be an object that says content type is going to be application JSON. And this is just typical boilerplate from MDN website. And then of course we need the body. Now the body is our post, so we need to send this as JSON. So we can say JSON, sorry, this has to be caps, stringify, there we go, and we want to send a new post. This should work, but we're not done here. So let's give it a refresh, give it a title and some content and create. So yes, we made a post request down here, and if we check our database, our fake database, you can see the post is here with the ID of 3 and created at this time. And if we go to home, after 1 minute, 1 second, we have our post down here and we can delete it and you can see it's gone. So one thing you noticed here, after we create a post, we stay on this page. That's not really helpful because we want to redirect the user back to the home page where they can see their post. We want to do something after this fetch is done. And again, this is a promise, so we can chain a then function and just pass an arrow function here and do something here. So we want to redirect the user back to the home page. And since we are using React Router, we can use that and navigate the user back to the home page. So React Router also has hooks, just like React itself. And the hook we want to use here is useNavigate. So this useNavigate hook gives us a navigate function. So we can save it inside our own variable. So we can say const navigate, which is going to be our function. We are going to use the useNavigate hook just like that. And now we can use this navigate down here. So we want to say navigate the user. It's a function and it takes the 2 parameter or the URL we want to send the user. We want to send them to the home page. So just a forward slash. So let's create a new post and see how it works. So I'm going to press create. There we go. So we are back to the home page and we have that loading because we have 1 second delay and the post is down here. And again, it's in our database. So that means I can delete it. That is also how we can navigate or redirect the user programmatically using React Router. All right, so just a couple final touches. When we create a post here, you notice the post goes at the bottom of the list down here, right? And usually the newest posts go on top. And this is quite easy actually. It's all done with JavaScript. We can just sort the data before setting it to the post. So we can say data.sort, and in order to sort an array by date, we can grab the A and B elements, or whatever we want to call it, X and Y, or post, next and previous, and we want to create a new date and pass the B created at attribute, so the second element in the array, and set that to minus another new date that is going to be a dot created at. So all these items, they have the property created at. We just kind of comparing the dates and we are sorting it. So if we save this one, give it a refresh, you can see now the newest posts go on top. So that was just one final touch. And the last one is to create a 404 page. So in many websites, you know, if you go to a URL that doesn't exist, it gives you a 404 page. Right now, if we go to somewhere that doesn't exist, for example, like that, this is what we get, an empty page. That's not really useful. I can close all of this and go to the app component. With React Router, we can grab all the pages except the ones that we have already declared. So we can create another route down here like that, and we set the path to that route to a star. That means everything except these. And we want to render an element when user goes to any page that is not our page. So for example, I want to create a page. I don't have it now, but I want to create a component called no page. So inside the pages, I'm going to create a new file called nopage.jsx, and let's create the function nopage. So this is going to be very simple. We are going to return an empty tag that probably says h1 404, and I'm going to apply some classes, text 9XL, font black, and then another h1 that says page not found. All right, so of course we need to export this no page component. There we go, and we can save it. We are done with this one. We can close this component, and back inside the app we need to import it. So I'm just going to copy paste that one and change post create to no page. So if we save this one and try to go to a page that doesn't exist, like that, we will get 404 page not found. We can also wrap this with a div or just add text center on these elements. That doesn't really matter. But because it is still nested inside our layout, the user has the ability to go back to the home page, get the new posts, or create a new post, or delete a post. And probably it would be a good idea to give the user an alert or a confirm dialog before they delete something. That's quite simple, so we're going to leave it as it is. And actually, that is about it. So we created our application with React and React Router, and we've learned the basics of React.js. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video and building this application with me. And I want to thank you all for your likes, subscribes, views, and shares, and all your support. And I'll see you at the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.